Hi, I'm Erin Lucy, and welcome back to my channel. I know this video is so incredibly late, but I have just been crazy with finishing my dissertation, and yeah, I just haven't got to this yet, but I really needed to do it now before I get even more behind on filming what I've been reading. So this is going to be a combined video of December and January reads. There's a lot of them, so I'm going to really try to keep my descriptions to a minimum. I am going to first talk about the holiday reads that I read, because I know we're pretty far past the holidays. So I'm just going to quickly kind of breeze through those. I read 5. I read a lot. I didn't really intend for that to happen. But I'm going to start with 2 that were both hockey romances by the same author. Season Schemings and Holiday Hostilities, and both of these I read via ebook, and so I'll just give you the premise for one of them. They have kind of similar tropes, like they're both kind of basic hockey romance. So in Season Schemings, Maddie is the main character, and she gets dumped by her boyfriend. It's not on live TV, but they're like on this cooking show and they're filming for it, and he like breaks up with her while they're filming one of the episodes for this show. But it was like back in summer, but it's like a holiday show, so it's going to be airing as we start to read this book. It's kind of devastating because not only was she like thinking that he was going to propose, but I think then he ends up like turning around and proposing to somebody else. So she's very shocked by it. It's this whole thing. Soon after, she begins a job as this nutritionist for this NHL team. And she meets like on her first day in the bathroom. I think she accidentally walks into the men's room and she meets Sebastian Slater, I think his name is, who's like the star of the NHL team. Atlanta, that's where we are. And you know, it's a bit of like an awkward, weird meet cute, but then they also have a moment in the kitchen and there's vibes. I won't say a ton else, but they kind of start talking to each other and kind of confiding each other in like both of the issues that they're having. Some thoughts on this. I like this overall. Like, given how my history with romance has been for like a contemporary romance, I thought this was pretty good, and thoughts of the main characters were pretty decent. I liked the relationship and had pretty few gripes with things. I thought that I wasn't sure how accurate a lot of like the portrayal of the NHL stuff was, so that I just made a note. Some things didn't seem entirely believable, but whatever, we can suspend that disbelief. And what else? The things that I had just like minor issue with, there's like a TikTok subplot where like she starts making these videos and like kind of going viral, but it's like, it was just like a weird thing to have, and like I feel like it was trying to create something else for her as the main character, but it played so little role that it felt like a weird thing to like even, it felt like trying to bring in too much, or like there should have been a greater focus on it. So there was just that, again, small gripe overall. The other thing that I had an issue with was the fast timeline. So if fast timelines are not your thing, I don't recommend this author's books, because very quick timelines. And I think it could have benefited a little bit by going slower, especially the epilogue. To me, I'm not going to say anything about it, but it just felt like really unrealistic and kind of silly. But everything else I enjoyed. I also enjoyed Holiday Hostilities. I remember less of what this one was about, and I think I enjoyed it slightly less. I think that this was the brother's best friend, and her brother is on the same team, and she has these like vibes with this player on the team. I thought this one was a little bit more cringy, but overall still enjoyed it. So yeah. The other one was The Holidates by Brittainy Cherry, and I also really enjoyed this. So overall, I feel like it was a pretty good month for just like contemporary romances. So gosh, what is her name? Holly Jackson. That's right. And she is a bit of a writer. She's a reader. She's like always got her nose in a book. And she meets this restaurant owner. He wants nothing to do with love after his last relationship, but he ends up like coaching her on like the dating scene and like helping her get dates, and then ends up being very like, oh my god, jealous. So I thought it was cute. I thought it was well done. It didn't have not too much of any tropes that like I find annoying. So yeah, The Holidates. The other 2 holiday books, one was The Nightmare Before Kissmas, and this was my like book club pick, or book club for December. or actually it was like November. I ended up bringing this on like the later side. I think I started at end of November and finished in early December, which I actually think is a good time to read this because although it's got this like Halloween and Christmas vibes, it feels way more Christmassy because essentially it's about the Prince of Christmas and Cole. Yep. Cole Claus. And it's like this world where there's like the real world and then like there's the holidays, but the holidays are also like magical, but they're kind of separate. Like there's these like kingdoms and they're princes and kings and princesses, queens of the holidays. And so this guy is the Prince of Christmas. And he, one night at the bar, I think he has of course like a reputation for being all, you know, crazy. And he gets super drunk, goes out into like an alleyway and like makes out with like this hot stranger who turns out is the Prince of Halloween. And there's like some rivalry, there's some weird tensions between the different holidays. So what happens is Cole is the heir to Christmas and goes home for the holidays because I think he's in college, and his like best friend Iris, who's the Easter princess who Cole's brother has been in love with for a long time, it's a whole other thing. It ends up like their parents like set them up and are basically gonna like make them get married, but then it turns into this weird competition where the Prince of Halloween comes to like vie for her hand. So that's kind of like what this is about. And there were parts of this that were very vibey and cute in terms of like the holidays. I think this was one of those that just like wasn't super for me. I just didn't find it to be like that exciting or interesting, and then like it was very lacking in like plot and world building. And I know it's not what it's supposed to be about, but it was trying to have this really deep plot line that I kind of struggled with in terms of like fully understanding what was going on, and like the believability was hard for me in this one. I also really didn't like how it like handled Cole's like brother's feelings for this Easter princess. There was like this subplot going on with that, and to be fair, like I know that character, like his brother's book is the next one, so it was kind of setting up for that, but I like was honestly kind of furious by how this ended, and like there was such a cliffhanger, but like a cliffhanger that was so unnecessary to me, like and strange to not tie up, if that makes sense. So okay, I feel like I've been kind of negative. Like again, vibes great, just like not my favorite thing in terms of plot. So then we had Spectacular by Stephanie Garber, and this is like a Caraval novella, the holiday novella. And I read Caraval a really long time ago, so this is part of maybe my issue with this. Overall, I think it was pretty enjoyable. It's a beautiful book, quick to read, just gorgeous illustrations. It also had some great holiday vibes, but because I read the series so long ago, I think I'm just so out of it that it was really hard for me to like remember and be on board with everything. So that's definitely a me problem, because I think on the overall this was interesting. I just like was like could not remember these characters like dynamics and like what was going on. So again, felt like a very me issue, but essentially it's basically great holiday eve, and Scarlett is like planning this like holiday celebration, and Donatella is like going on this adventure searching for like the perfect gift for Legend. Shenanigans kind of ensue. It's very like Caraval vibes, like it has a lot of that. I can also say that like even though I'm outside of reading the series and that was a struggle for me, I think this was tough. Like novellas are just sometimes really tough to like really have fleshed out plot and like really be invested in everything. But again, it did what it set out to do, I think. So next is another kind of like seasonal thing from autumn, because I also was finishing up at the beginning of the month. I was finishing up Autumn by Allie Smith, because I've been trying to read her books, although I don't know that I'm gonna end up reading them all this year, because she's got this like seasonal quartet. And so I read Autumn, and this is the story about Elizabeth and her childhood neighbor Daniel, and it basically starts with Elizabeth trying to get her passport updated and like having all these issues with it. And the writing really drew me in. I think this is what Allie Smith does. Like the writing was absolute vibes. This like really mundane thing I was very intrigued by and really pulled into it. she gets basically denied a passport for like really ridiculous reasons and has to go on doing other things. It kind of reminded me a little bit of like Frederick Bachman's like writing style. I don't even know if that's super accurate, or maybe just like gave me similar feelings. Anyway, so then we end up going back in time to when she was young and had these conversations with this neighbor Daniel as a child. I don't even know how to explain like my thoughts, feelings, opinions on this book. It's kind of bizarre. It's bizarre, and I really don't know what to think about it. The timeline is like all over the place, and I think I struggle with that. I also listened to this one, and I've been struggling a little bit with audiobooks lately. Like, it has to be like an audiobook. If it hits, it's great and I can follow and like I don't have an issue, but I've just had this problem more and more frequently where I'm struggling to like really stay immersed in an audiobook. And so I think this was kind of where my audiobook problem started, because I just was like, felt like I could not follow. Yeah, I don't know. I was like confused, I think, when trying to think about like the overall plots and themes and like that. I will say too about this one, this is definitely more of like an early autumn read. I recommend reading it earlier autumn. And I will also say that she's a British writer from the UK, and I'm wondering if some of it hits a little bit more if you're British. I don't know. I just felt like I didn't get a ton out of it, and I like had high expectations because I'd heard good things about it. That being said, I probably will continue because I like the writing style and I was very intrigued, and it sounds like each of the stories are really different. So I'm definitely going to give her another chance. But there's Autumn. Oh gosh, I forgot one. I forgot a holiday book because I don't own this one, but it's fine. So the other one, yeah, wow, okay, I'm doing terribly at this, but is the Christmas Orphans Club. So this is by Becca Freeman, and she's a podcast that I enjoy, so that's like how I learned about this book, and it's kind of been on my radar. I think it came out last summer, like a year and a half ago maybe, and so I was intrigued, but had been a long wait at the library at that time, so I didn't end up reading it, and I listened to it in December. And it's kind of like a found family, like friend drama kind of book. So basically it's about Hannah and Finn, and they like spend their Christmases together because they don't really have a place to go, and it's about them like having this family, but like there's this weird mystery about some like drama that has happened, and it has like really created tensions in their friend groups. There's actually like 4 of them that all end up coming together on Christmases, but it was Finn and Hannah that kind of started this. And I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit disappointed by this one. I just had pretty high expectations, but I didn't find myself to be super invested in this. I feel so bad saying this because like I wanted to like this a lot. I just like didn't love Hannah as a main character. I wasn't super invested in her story or like the drama that was going on. And like I guess I thought it would be more focused on like the found family situation, but it felt like more about the drama. And so I just like, yeah, I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. So I was a little bit sad about that, but that was the last, I believe that was the last holiday read. Technically not a holiday one, but very vibes, like wintry vibes. I don't have it with me because I read my parents' copy when we were visiting, but that was The Golden Compass. This was my reread for December, and I had such a great time rereading this. So many things like I didn't remember that, like, yes, it's just so great. If you haven't read it, it's about Lyra, and she lives in this world where they have these demons, and the demon, they're like a human soul, and in this world, their soul, like they all have them, and they're like connected on this like deeper level. And as children, these like demons can like they can like turn into any sort of creature, but I think as they mature and grow older, that their creature takes on like a permanent form, an animal form. But they're like connected on the soul level of understanding each other. And yeah, so it's kind of the basis. Lyra is this girl who grows up like without her parents, but she's kind of like in an affluent position, like respected position, and she is a kid in this book, and she starts to go on an adventure, particularly because these gobblers, they call them these gobblers, are basically children are disappearing, and she's trying to figure out what's going on, especially because one of her friends gets taken. There's also a lot of other mystery and intrigue, other characters who come in trying to get Lyra to do certain things and control her in certain ways. I won't say anything else because if you haven't read it, I highly, highly recommend reading this book. It's like, I can't believe I haven't like stayed on this, and like, I don't know, I feel like it's like Harry Potter level of like growing up childhood greatness. I don't know, so good. I loved it. I love going back. Yeah, it's really good. It's kind of also reminds me a little bit of like Narnia vibes. Like I just like that. Oh, I just so recommend it. And part of why I wanted to reread this is because I really wanted to read the next two. So this is a trilogy. It's called His Dark Materials. And I, as a kid, like I'm not convinced that I ever finished the series. And so I really want to do that. So I went back and reread The Golden Compass. We had The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and this is absolutely fantastic. Was in my like top favorite nonfictions of the year, and it's so fantastic. He breaks this book down into 3 different parts and takes you on this like journey of discovery that like he goes through. Yeah, I have to remember so the different parts of it, but basically his inaugural trip to Africa, and he finds himself in 2 places, a modern city in Senegal, and the ghost-haunted country of his imagination. And then he takes readers to Columbia, South Carolina, where he is reporting on like basically the banning of his books in particular. So this is very political. There's a lot of interesting commentary on racism and how to deal with it, and his like changing views on like social issues basically in general and in the US in particular. So then the third part of this book, he goes to the West Bank in Palestine, and he learns about the oppression of the Palestinian people, and it really changes his view of like reparations and of how we think about each other and solve problems and think about remedying like really deep-seated social issues. So I highly, highly recommend this. I loved it. It's also like pretty short and very palatable, and I just cannot recommend it enough. So The Message. Oh yeah, we actually had one other novella that I read, and this one I listened to this one on audiobook. I don't actually own it, and that is A Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So I had watched the film early on in the fall for the first time ever, the Johnny Depp film, and I was like so intrigued by it. Like I cannot believe I hadn't watched it before. It's so perfectly gothic fall vibes, and I was so interested in it, and I really wanted to read the original story. So I read this one towards the beginning of December, and it is the classic tale by Washington Irving. It's short, but there's a lot of really fantastic prose and fall vibes in the book. Very like vivid imagery for fall. And it's basically this spooky like tale of a headless horseman. And in the original story, Ichabod Crane is a schoolmaster in this really small Connecticut town. In the film, he comes to this small town as a detective trying to figure out what's going on with these like headless murders. Anyway, back to like the book, he falls for Katrina Van Tassel, which is also kind of represented in the movie, except he's as a character, Ichabod Crane is definitely portrayed as like definitely not as great a person in the book as I feel like he kind of is in the movie. But yeah, I didn't love the description of women, and like this relationship with Ichabod and Katrina definitely verged on very creepy. I mean, kind of in both, but particularly in the book, in the novella. So there were some like weird, creepy things that I didn't like, but it is great fall vibes. And definitely if you are interested in like, you enjoy the movie, I highly recommend reading like the classic like tale that this is based on. So yeah, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Next, we had For She Is Wrath by Emily Varga. Okay, I wanted to show, because this is the Fairy Loot edition of the thing fell out, and I just think it's really beautiful. Oh, I love it, love it. This is like the original cover, so if you're not familiar, that's what it actually looks like. And yeah, so let's talk about my thoughts with this one. If you had asked me back in December, I would have definitely told you I was really struggling with YA, particularly in this romanticy sense. I will say in this past month, I've actually read a lot of YA that I liked. So I think it's also in part just kind of me really being able to identify and knowing when I'm gonna like a book or not. To be fair, I'm not sure I would have picked this book up. Oh, I should hold it. If it weren't for Fairy Loot. That's like why I picked it up. But like, even by the title, I feel like I should have known that I wasn't gonna completely vibe with this book because of the main character and like just like the strong emphasis on wrath and like really wrathful main characters. So this is basically this YA Pakistani retelling of the Count of Monte Cristo, which I haven't read yet, but I was really intrigued by this premise. Basically, Dania, she's like imprisoned in this really terrible place, and that's how we start out. She is in prison and she is like trying to escape and like immediately gets caught. We also learned some backstory that like Mazen was her friend and lover and he basically betrayed her, and that's why she's there in prison. So it gives very like Selena Sardothian, that very classic like in prison, like When the Moon Hatched, like angry but badass main character who thinks they can do everything and be, I don't know, that kind of vibe has just like not been it for me lately. I like to have some like dimensionality to my characters and some like reasoning behind things. But that was like part of my issue with this, is just like you don't see her, like we open in this prison, I don't get to see all the things that led up to her like being the way she is, and that has been a struggle for me with main characters like this, whereas like because it's hard for me to believe her wrath and her where she's at mentally, and so like I've just had a really hard time getting on board with some characters. But anyway, she meets this girl Nora, and when Nora digs into her cell and is also trying to escape, and she's apparently been trying to escape for a really freaking long time, and so they decided to try to escape together, and that's kind of how it all starts, and it all has to do with us kind of figuring out what happened before and her escaping, and again learning about like what happened and what is going on in this world. There was a lot that I liked about it. I felt like it was pretty well written and it was interesting. There were things that were slightly different. So I think, let me go back to like kind of the characters and believability thing. Like the issue I have and had with this main character is when she thinks she's the absolute smartest person ever and kind of arrogant and always in the right about like their opinions and what they do. She had growth, so I will give it that. But the problem I see with the believability part of that, because like teenagers, you know, I get it, I was one, I feel like I've been there in that kind of a headspace. But the issue with believability for me is then they do a bunch of really dumb shit and you don't see, again, a lot of like the character's history and backstory. And I just feel like that happened in this. There was like a lot of dumb things. Yeah, I'm not gonna go on because it's like kind of a typical how I often feel. I felt like this with a lot of like, again, When the Moon Hatched, with Throne of Glass. It's just, I feel like you're dropped into the story. You don't have enough backstory to like believe and feel for the character. And it's just hard because I also don't love the like reputation it can give to like a female main character. Because like I want to root for her. I want her to be this like badass character who can overcome things. But it's hard. Like the believability is just hard. And this one was like that for me. There was a really weird like aspect of the magic that I didn't really know how to feel about. It was unique in my reading, but also like really bizarre. I won't say too much, but there's also like a lot of flashbacks to what was going on because I was part of the story was figuring this out. And I guess I just like found some of this to be pretty confusing in terms of like the plot, world building and magic and just like the way it was all coming together. I think just maybe on the overall, everything wasn't like quite fleshed out enough for me in terms of like the plot, magic and characters for me to be really excited, on top of like struggling with specific tropes that I already know I struggle with. If you like Throne of Glass, if you like When the Moon Hatched and like that kind of character, you might really enjoy that, I think. Okay, we're gonna stop talking about this one. We have 3 more books. I know, this is insane. I'm still in December. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about David Copperfield. I chose to read this in December and this took up a lot of my reading time. I tried to take some time on this and I really wanted to like take it all in and I'm really glad I did. It just also like the comparison of like really good character building and really good like development of a person throughout their life. It's Buildings Roman. Jane Eyre I read in November and this had similar vibes and similar, these just really fascinating similarities about like seeing a character as they grow up in like a tough situation. I like at this era, I think a lot of the characters are like orphaned or, you know, a parent of some kind is not with them anymore and they have to like really face these struggles. And so I know this is long, but like I cannot recommend it enough. I feel like it is just such a pillar to character work and character growth that like I really see now and I think I can appreciate. I think if I'd read this as a teenager, in school, I don't think I would have had the same appreciation for it, but it just blew me away in terms of like the character work, in terms of like seeing this character grow, seeing the people that they come in contact with, and those characters also being pretty fleshed out, and you kind of just starting to get glimpses of understandings of who they are, both like the good characters and the bad characters. Like it just, I loved it. Some of my favorite characters ever, I think, are in this book, like David, but like Mr. Peggotty. There's others too. I feel like there was a lot. I loved it so much. I didn't expect it. I think I had like this misconception, having read A Christmas Carol, which I enjoy, but for some reason, like I thought I was not a Dickens person. Like I thought I was not be into his writing. I love this. So definitely gonna have to try more of his work in the future. We're trying to be concise because we still have a whole nother month to go through. Next we had Dominicana by Angie Cruz. And I believe this was my old TBR pick from December, which I'm so proud of myself for getting to them, because I feel like I'm like really knocking out books that I've had on my TBR for a really long time. This was like a book of the month in 2019, which is crazy. And this is about Ana Cancion. She gets married to this guy who's like twice her age and taken to New York City. Yeah, she gets taken basically from the Dominican countryside to New York City. She's actually not super psyched to go, but like everyone in her family, everyone is very like, you need to go to New York City, you need to be able to make money and provide for family. And basically they feel like she's like living the dream, but she run it, like her struggles abound. And it was like very heartbreaking to read. It was like very much an immigrant story, and the story of a woman who is incredibly like oppressed and controlled. But it was really good, fantastically written. I think it's like important reading and important perspective to read about and understand. Yeah, I think it was great, really interesting viewpoint in terms of like a true immigrant to a city who just really struggled to like even be able to do anything on her own there, and trying to like overcome and like live in this city with this like really controlling older husband. So that's Dominicana. I thought this was really good. So, okay, great. I was like, I hope I have notes on this one, because man, oh man. So last is One for My Enemy by Olivia Blake. And I have had such a mixed relationship with Olivia Blake. I talk about it in my like best books of 2024. Like I read the Atlas Six and have had the most mixed feelings on a book like ever. There were just like parts of it that I absolutely loved, but then like parts of it like completely detested. So it's just like such a weird relationship with her as an author. And I've been kind of pondering this, because maybe I need to kind of approach her books differently, because I think part of it is like she has one of the most unique ways of storytelling I think that I've ever read, and I don't really even know how to explain it, because it's not really like any books that I've read before. So anyway, I might need to like revisit the Atlas Six and revisit her work with like a kind of refreshed perspective in terms of how to approach. But One for My Enemy is basically this Romeo and Juliet retelling, and it's about the Antonov sisters and the Fedorov brothers. Are they in New York City? I think they are. Yeah, they're in New York City in this one as well. And there is magic, so they're witches, and yeah, there's all sorts of really interesting things. I will say about the kind of world building and magic, that part was pretty weak to me. Like it was really hard for me to understand and picture the magic that was happening. But essentially there's like these really deep-seated rivalry and kind of hatred and loves between these two families, and it kind of all revolves around those like hostilities. But yeah, I really struggled with the world building and magic, just like truly picturing what was going on in terms of like the magic, and world building was difficult. I was just confused about the magic the different people had, how that equated to power in different people. Like that was just not super clear to me at different parts, and I felt like it was a little bit inconsistent. So it just was like hard for me to follow that and understand. Now, I feel like I'm being a little negative here, but the reality is like I felt like this was super vibey, and a lot of it like I enjoyed for the most part and could get past a lot of that, because it felt like that was less of the focus. Again, the power thing started to play a bigger role later on, and that's I think where the confusion was a bit tough for me. Yeah, the first third though such a vibe. Like, I loved it. So this is why I have similar feelings to Atlas 6, because I just like loved the first third. I can't even express to you like the Romeo and Juliet vibes, the like love story, the tension, it was great. Then there's some things that happened that I just was not a super big fan of. And like one of the things I don't like that I had an issue with, especially later on in the book, it's such a spoiler, so I can't really say. I guess I'll just leave a mini spoiler. Like, I'm not gonna say exactly what happens, but if you want to know nothing, maybe I'll just put on the screen like when to skip to. But I thought the stakes in this were not there for me. And if you've read it, or if you do read it, you will see what I mean. But I thought that this was gonna really like satisfy me, and I thought it was doing one thing that I was just loving in the first part, and I was like so impressed by, only to be completely disappointed by. And that, yeah, again, I don't want to say too much to get anything away, but really disappointed in that part. So it just like things didn't feel as like high stakes and emotional after these things happen halfway through. Anyway, so I will say one other thing though. The love was incredibly poetic and beautiful, and somehow like not too cheesy. So that, like, yes, I feel like it did the Romeo and Juliet thing in that sense. Like, that was fantastic. The emotion of the characters just was really beautiful. This was like this sort of like tortured love situation, and I think it did a really good job in terms of like those emotions and those like love, like, tension and strain. So again, same as the Atlas 6, I feel like I have this weird thing with Olivia Blake where like I had the most mixed feelings on her book. Like, some parts I absolutely love so much and want it to be my favorite book, but then it also does some things that I'm like, that just are so incredibly disappointing. So yeah, I don't know how else to talk about this book, but I'm gonna say same as the Atlas 6. I think because I had such strong positive feelings, I think on the overall, super glad I read this and really enjoyed, but feel mixed about. I'm gonna take a mini pause because that was December, and I know that was a lot. Let's count up. I think December was by far my biggest reading month in all of 2024. 12, 13, 14 books. Like, I don't know how I did that. I just was like rolling, and it was great. And it was crazy because like we were also like, we're on vacation for half of that and like pretty busy, but somehow I just like got really into the habit of like, instead of looking at my phone, I was just like reading, and it was great. Let's talk about January. A couple less in this. I read, technically 11 is like what I counted on like Storygraph and Goodreads. One was a short story, and I'll talk about why I included it in this in a second, but we're gonna try to be fast again. First we had, and I actually ended up lending this to my dad. We were like leaving Colorado, and I was talking to him about it, and I just like really thought he would enjoy it, so I left it with him, and that is The Warmth of Other Suns. This is a nonfiction book about the migration of Black families out of the South throughout the course of time, but particularly like following the Civil War, and it follows three families in the early to mid 1900s and what these families went through. And it's an incredible book. Like, I was so blown away by it. Like, the research that went into this was so incredible, so like wide reaching. She did so many interviews, and you could tell that it was just really well researched. At the same time, because she like really went in on these three families, it was very emotional and personal, and there were these like stories and like narratives to it that made it like have this really like emotional feel to it that sometimes is lacking in like some nonfiction, where it's like really cut and dry, like this is what happened. So I just like, this is incredible. I think this should absolutely be like required reading in the US. Incredible, so good. Can't recommend it enough. Then we had the 11th Medal by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the one that like I'm counting because like I need to keep track of my reading through the Cosmere, but I wouldn't normally count this because it's just like one short story in a collection of stories. So hopefully down the line I'll be able to finish the Arcana Unbound and I'll count that whole book. But for now, just so I can keep track of what I'm reading in the Cosmere, I will talk about this. This is the 11th Medal. It is basically a Mistborn era 1, first era, I don't know what they call it, short story. I finished the last Mistborn book last year, and so this was a short story about Kelsier and some of his like motivations pre-Mistborn. I enjoyed this, but it was like a short story. It was very quick. I enjoyed seeing some of his like background and like why he is who he is, but it's very short. It's like 20 pages or something. So that was the 11th Medal. Right, so then we had All the Water in the World by Eiren Caffel. And this was a new release that I do have a little story behind that I might actually have some footage that I can put in of me getting this book. We were in New York City, in Brooklyn, visiting my partner's sister who lives there. And we were just like walking around. We ended up going into McNally Jackson on the day that this was being released. And this was on my radar already. I knew I wanted to read it. It just sounded up my alley so completely. So I went in there and they like didn't have it, but like they looked it up and it was like supposed to be coming in because this was release day. It was Tuesday, I think the 7th of January. And I like gave them my number and then they texted me like very shortly after. So I just like quickly went back into the bookstore and I bought it. And it's just like a cute little fun story with actually acquiring this book. And I'll give you a little bit of a synopsis. Ooh, yes, little adorable little McNally Jackson bookmark that I'm actually gonna put in the middle so it doesn't fall out. Noni, and her Bix is her older sister. Yeah, so and those are their nicknames. But they live with their parents. Well, in the beginning, like their mom has died very early on, but it is post-apocalyptic and they live on the top of the American Museum of Natural History. They call it Ammon, and they live on the top of it. And the reason they live there is I think both of their parents were like researchers who would like work there and had access to it. And so now there's like this group of families who live on top of it who were like related in some way, like worked at this museum. And they are trying to still like catalog and keep as much, like preserve as much as they can in this very dystopian world where sea levels have risen and a lot of storms are hitting. So we begin with a hypercane, and the fact that a book used the term hypercane, just like, I don't know, I love that so much. Anyway, a hypercane hits, which is like an absolutely insane storm in our world. It's like theoretical, and it hits, they have to leave. Like they have to leave, it's really bad. They're not gonna be able to stay there. And so it's like their journey of them getting out of the city. I read a lot of New York City books, I feel like, recently. Anyway, we were there, so it kind of makes sense. But this is their journey leaving. It's their journey in a really pretty dark world, but from this girl's perspective, who's pretty young, and I don't remember, you kind of see her grow up, or at least for a number of years in her life, but she starts out pretty young and is like recording, and you're seeing from her point of view, and it's very dystopian, pretty dark, like on the darker side of dystopians, but there is like some more lightheartedness. I don't really know how to explain it. I don't want to give anything away, but I love this. I thought it was really great. I just love a dystopian book, and this definitely did not disappoint. So, all the water in the world. Then we had The Sound of Stars, and this was my old TBR pick for January. And this is a YA sci-fi, and we are in this like future where aliens have invaded and basically taken over, don't really have any regard for human life, and are trying to take over in different ways. And we follow, once again, don't know her name, Ellie, right. Ellie, we follow Ellie, who is 17, and she is like going through this experience. She doesn't want to lose her family. She's going through this experience of like end of world alien takeover scenario. And she meets Morris, which is spelled in a strange way, Morris, who is one of the aliens, and they start to like share with each other and like understand each other on a different level through things like books and music, and they go on this kind of crazy adventure. And I really enjoyed this. I'm so glad I got to it. I feel like, yeah, I remember like choosing this again, like 2020, like years ago when it came out, and for some reason never got to it, and I loved it. It was like super up my alley. It had very like deep themes of humanity, of what it means to be alive, but what like life is. Oh, it just was so good. I will say, I mean, there were definitely parts that weren't as strong in terms of like the world building and plot, not world building, but like the plot that was going on, because it was pretty like big and epic, and I think it needed to be a little bit longer, or maybe like a series, in order to like flesh that out a bit more, because things happened like really quick, and I feel like things maybe needed to be slowed down a little bit in order to like really make sense of what was happening and going on. But on the overall, I love this. Thought it was so good. It was cute. Like there was like the cute love aspect, but then there was also this whole like humanity aspect. I think I had like several quotes written down. One is, yes, I believe the universe has a way of bringing two people together. Two people who are just, what is the saying? Meant to be. Anyway, so there's a lot of really great quotes. There was like some really interesting like thinking about like the value of life and like these aliens, like they valuing life, but then like how they treated humans. Some really just like interesting and thought-provoking ideas on all of that. So yeah, I enjoyed that. Ooh, this is so tough if I talk about this or not. I guess I'm gonna talk about this because it's a potential DNF and I almost never talk about DNFs. And so it's possible in the next few months I will end up finishing this, which is why I'm on the fence about talking about it, because it's so rare that I truly DNF a book. Very rare. I've only talked about them a couple of times on here, but that is A Harvest of Hearts. Again, I may end up continuing this, but the reason I'm seeing it as like a legit potential DNF is the writing has just been really clunky and hard for me to get through. And I have an arc of this from NetGalley, and I was very excited about it. It does have some like Howl's Moving Castle vibes. There's this girl who thinks she's like terribly ugly and spends the first, I don't know, couple chapters talking about how ugly she is, and then she goes and starts working for this like wizard sorcerer guy. So it's very Howl's Moving Castle. Like that part of it feels like those vibes. It just has been so slow for me. Like I could not believe how long it was taking me to get through the beginning of it. And the writing, she has this really interesting style where it's like kind of this like old English, and she uses legit words. Like clearly she's like done her research and knows this, but the way it's written feels really clunky. And I think that's part of why it's taking me so long to read, because I am not familiar with this language, and it's just like every now and then will be like plopped in there some like old English kind of way of writing. And there's some other things too, like just like the way she's writing it. Sometimes she'll say things like she's like in this full-blown conversation with these guys at this like bar, and then she just says like, I named my village. Like she narrates that. So there's just some things about the writing that is just not fitting with me. Again, I don't think like objectively it's necessarily bad. Like she clearly has done research on this like old English vibe and is trying to bring that in. It's just been a struggle for me. So yeah, that's not like one of the ones that I finished, but I did kind of want to talk about that because it's coming out in March, I believe. And then we had Mountains Beyond Mountains by Tracy Kidder. This is my nonfiction actual pick from the month, and this is about Dr. Paul Farmer, who is this doctor who did a lot of really important work. I'm gonna turn this on. Really important work in, I think it was particularly in Haiti, but this story follows him in a couple of different places and projects, and really incredible, really inspiring, like as a person to hear about and read this man's like journey to follow Paul Farmer and like his motivations and his, yeah, it's just like one of those people who's just like incredibly inspiring and selfless, but like interesting in an interesting way, and interesting to kind of like read about the work he's done and how he has inspired and, you know, changed healthcare. So yeah, Mountains Beyond Mountains. Ooh, next we had The Favorites by Lane Fargo, and ooh, this one is a new release. I think it was released on January 14th. I read this like right away. It was on my radar for a while. When I heard it was like an ice dancing romance, it's not really romance, but it's more like literary, I was like, yes, absolutely, cannot wait. Watched a whole bunch of ice dancing, which I highly recommend, especially if you're not super familiar. It definitely adds to the vibes, because you can just see, like, if you know ice dancing versus like normal pairs or something like that, the vibes fit this book and like the tensions that were going on in this book so well. So I really recommend watching some videos. The Favorites is about Katarina, I believe, and Heath, I think that's his name, and they are like childhood friends, like grew up as these like partners for this ice dancing, and they have though this like relationship that is romantic, and they have these like tensions. They have insane chemistry that everybody sees, but there's a lot of drama that goes on, a lot to do with the sporting world and like competition, and them also coming on into their own, into adulthood together, but in this like really competitive atmosphere. Overall, fantastic. I think it was really good. I think I gave it 4 stars, and so I think it like it was a little bit overhyped for me. I think I had like absolutely insane expectations for it, and it was really good. But I will say, like, the main character is not likable whatsoever, and I think their dynamic is like really toxic, and I think they're both really toxic from each other. And while I liked that it was in this like interview style and there were occasionally voices from other people, also listen to the audiobook. Johnny Weir is one of the narrators in the audiobook, and oh, I just loved it. It was so great. But you're mostly in Katarina's head, And I think that was tough. Like, I wish it had been like more balanced out and you had seen from his perspective, because it made me really frustrated with her because she was very like not self-aware at all. And I think that was like really a struggle for me. Like, I really wish she would have been a little bit more aware of her own like flaws and struggles and how she handled things. And I think it would have made me so much more sympathetic towards her viewpoints. But to be fair, it also gives you such an interesting look at this like competitive world and like how that can do that to people. Anyway, yes, the favorites, I highly recommend. It is very Daisy Jones and the Six vibes to me, but in this like ice dancing realm. So we have A Winter's Promise, and I also ended up reading the second one, so I'll just talk about those two both really quick. A Winter's Promise I've had now for a little while, and I've been wanting to read it in winter, and I'm so glad I finally got around to it because it is really great winter vibes. It's a French author, and it is like this steampunky fantasy situation, and it's about Ophelia, who basically possesses these special gifts. She can basically see into an object's past when she touches it, and she can also travel through mirrors. And the way this world works is there's these different arcs, and she's like from one arc. And the people on that arc, like her family, they have specific magic that's kind of similar to hers. There's like an arranged marriage. She gets married off to, or engaged off to, Thorn, who's from a different arc, very different, and that arc is very snowy and wintry. And it's just completely different though. And like Ophelia is going into this world, like she has no idea. Everything is different. The politics are different. The magic are different. Just like completely unknown to her. And she quickly realizes there's a lot of like stuff going on here that is like, she doesn't understand and doesn't know and is trying to like figure out and survive. Like Thorn like seems like he like hates her, and there's this like major animosity where they both like don't want to get married to each other, but like because of their obligation, neither of them want to be the one to like call it off. I also enjoyed the second one. I feel like it definitely takes like a very different turn, and I don't know where the rest of the series is going. I think eventually I do want to read them all. But yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I will be continuing the series. We had, next was another dystopian, The Blue Book of Nebo. Very similar vibes, honestly, to All the Water in the World, kind of. Yeah, this is, I believe, a Books and Lala recommendation, and I feel like I heard the description of this and was similarly like, oh my gosh, yes, this is so my vibe. And it definitely didn't disappoint. Like, it kind of gives all the water in the world, but also like the road vibes, because it's this relationship between this mother and her son, and they're dynamic and they're trying to survive in this world. It's very sad. There's a lot of sad parts to it. They have like kind of a not the best relationship, or like a really kind of strained relationship where they're really not sharing much with each other. So they end up like writing in this journal as a way of communicating to each other, but I don't think they actually are supposed to like look at each other's journal entries. Anyway, I love this. I thought it was great. I thought the writing was fantastic. I will say, while I loved it, I don't think I love this also as much as I quite expected to. I think it didn't hit as hard potentially. Maybe like if you have children, it could hit harder, maybe, I don't know. But yes, overall, really enjoyed and recommend if you like a dystopian kind of like the road vibes. It's less dark than the road, but yeah. Okay, we're in the home stretch, so we just got two more, I believe. Onyx Storm. So I did end up picking this up as soon, well, not quite as soon as it was released, but within that week. And I'm really torn about whether to talk about this in any significant way. I actually ended up filming a kind of vlog or like summary of it that I'm probably not going to post, because it just was not, I feel like it ended up kind of being a bit of a hate read, not hate read, because like I just keep being really having a hopeful view of the series and then being let down. I loved Fourth Wing. I thought it was great. It was just like a very addictive, fun read. It was like by no means like an amazing like world building, but I was very intrigued in the first book, and I thought like the tension was pretty good, and like there was like, I really enjoyed reading Fourth Wing. I did not really enjoy reading Iron Flame. It felt like really rushed. Things didn't feel super fleshed out. I just have so many questions about the world that I have hope will get answered, but just like I'm not as convinced. I'm just like struggling with the series because I'm just like, I'm very confused by the politics. I'm very confused by motivations of people. I'm confused by a lot of things. Again, we're in the middle of a series, so potentially these things will get answered, but I didn't feel like this was super strong. It felt very fillery. It felt very nothing-ish. Like, I feel like I ended up finishing it and just being like, oh, like, I don't know, I have zero feelings on it. I just feel like we're back where we started at the end of the last book. That's what it feels like. So I don't know, really, I don't want to keep talking about this too long because I feel like I definitely could rant about it for a while. It's a very beautiful book, by the way, but I don't know. There's so many things I could say. I really got, I'm sorry if this is like a hot take. This might be a hot take, but in this book, I got the ick from Xaden. There's a reason maybe that can be explained, but the protective, I don't know. I just was not about it. No. Yeah. So I'm like a little bit turned off by that. I just didn't love that part. And their relationship just, I don't know, it felt boring in this one. There was like nothing going on, nothing deeper. It was like better than the last one, and that there wasn't this like weird miscommunication thing. Like Violet wasn't being all, sorry, this is spoilery of this series, but she wasn't being all frustrated by the secret keeping thing. Like, but it was kind of weird in its own way, and there wasn't like a whole lot of like character building or growth or like relationship growth for them. Yeah, and then the plot to me just was like, no, I was just also confused, and yeah, I won't say anything else because it will be spoilery, but personally, I'm just not vibing, and I feel like part of that definitely stems from like it just being so hyped and people like loving it so much, and I kind of like look at like the writing and the plot and the characters, and I'm like, I don't think that it lives quite up to like the amount of hype it's getting, and I think that is part of what is like a little bit triggering about this in particular. But yeah, Onyx Storm. Let's go. Our last book from January. I know this is a long video, but Death of the Author. This is another new release. So I was pretty proud of myself in January. While I want to be reading my books too, I also want to be in some way like trying to keep up with new releases. And so I read 4 new releases in January, which is I think pretty good. And in Death of the Author is like this cool sci-fi literary book, and this was, I think, the Warmth of Other Suns and this book were by far my favorites of the month. Zaylu's this like writer, and she's really struggling. She is struggling on a personal level. She's struggling with her writing. Just things are just not happening for her, and she's like struggling with her family dynamic, and she ends up deciding to just like write this book for herself. Because like all of her other books I think have been a little bit more literary, and like this is super different. She ends up writing this book about this like futuristic world and about these robots in this futuristic world, and it is so interesting. Like, I just love this. There was like this mix between like the chapters would be mixed. You would get chapters that were like from the book that she wrote, and these robots like dealing with this futuristic world where like humans are gone and they're trying to like figure out dynamic. I don't know, I was just so fascinated. I actually, the only complaint was like I would want more of those chapters. I do. But I also really enjoyed the other chapters, and I feel like it was really an interesting kind of like parallel and like woven story to have. The other chapters were following Zaylu and her like dynamics with her family like trying to be really, like, she was always frustrated by them being like really involved and about like the way they were caring about her. And yeah, it was just so interesting. I think it was fantastic writing. I think it was so good. I just loved it. There was a lot of really interesting themes of like love, family, of like humanity, of what it means to like care about each other. I just love this. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's for everybody, but I loved it. I had such a good time reading it. So okay, anyway, that's everything that I read in January and December. I'm sorry this video is so long, but hopefully there is something in there for everybody. I've been having a great time reading, so it's been good, and it's continued to be good in February, so I can't wait to share those reads at the end of the month. I'm going to try to get back on a regular like monthly schedule. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.